Hi, everybody, and welcome back to RHAP's coverage of The Amazing Race 37. And hello, Bali. We are here to travel to Indonesia as the heat is on, not only temperature wise, but drama wise, as we have a brand new twist to break down in all of the very interesting choices therein. I hope everyone took time to take a bathroom break because we are going nonstop through a discussion of this leg. And I'm talking with my number one here on We Know Amazing Race, Jessica Liese. Jess, how are you?
I'm doing great, Mike. Can't wait to unpack everything that's happened this episode because I think, as we were saying before we got on, choices were made, and we're
Oh, yeah.
gonna need to analyze those choices. We might be here for a while.
Tatiana would have a field day with these choices. Even the choice to unpack, as you said, a certain piece of wardrobe from Jonathan's perspective and unpack perhaps his obsession with Indiana Jones. I am attempting my best to do my own Indiana Jones cosplay, though Jess admitted before we got on, this is a Survivor shirt that I have tried to retrofit into Indiana Jones garb. So it feels like the streams are crossed in more ways than one. Of course, don't miss out on a second of all the streaming we do about The Amazing Race. We know amazingrace.com to not miss a second of all the podcasts we do here, including Jess's weekly exit press. And go to our Facebook group as well. robhasawebsite.com/tar group. Join the Amazing Race book to break down everything from these episodes alongside a swath of Amazing Race fans, Jess, even more than the 6 teams that were all on the mat at once this episode.
Man, I love it and I hate it when that happens because I feel like if you're the 6th out of 6 that's just like landing on the mat simultaneously, like how screwed must you feel?
Yeah, I mean, especially like imagine if somehow Bernie and Kerrigan had been able to find their way to the detour and actually kind of like outfoxed this dozen people. And so now it's like it was a foot race to the pit stop. You just didn't know that at the time.
Yeah, and now we're gonna eliminate you in front of everybody.
I mean, just maybe that moment is kind of representative of my overall thoughts on this episode, which is I'm going to call it a mess. But usually when I use that term, I more so ascribe it to like stuff going on from production's perspective. For what it's worth, I thought actually the tasks this leg were awesome. And I think we're kind of continuing in line with some very strong tasks in this leg. It's more so a lot of the decisions that a lot of the teams were making. I mean, one team, first and foremost, literally first and foremost, as I'm sure we'll get into on this podcast, but it was a gaggle of many, many decisions being made that also, I think, interestingly sets up, Jess, some rare social strategy elements to be brought in, as we'll find out next week how much it's going to culminate in this double U-turn vote.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have some notes for production as well. Like I'm very high on the tasks. I think the tasks themselves were great, but I have some quibbles. I think
All right.
there are a few things I might have done differently, and as you know, production loves it when I have quibbles and they listen to me and take my advice because they're avid listeners of this podcast.
See,
But
you could say that with your eyes rolled, but like, remember when we talked about a show with Phil Kogan on it, and then he came onto the podcast and said, like, I've responded to your feedback?
yes, but that's a show Phil cares about.
Oh, Jess!
Oh, sorry, that's not what I meant. It's only
listen,
a little bit what I meant.
This was an episode all about people saying quiet parts out loud. So I find it so thematic with the episode. I mean, we got to start first and foremost with the new here. Maybe this is where your list starts. I'm not entirely sure, as I want to get your thoughts on the driver's seat. Now, what I will say is, what I'd speculated on last week when this was introduced, which was like, okay, I hope it's not just that you get an advantage and everyone else gets a disadvantage. There was a little bit of method to the madness here, at least on paper, of getting to stratify things a little bit, right? It's like that old Survivor reward where you got to assign who got what meal that night. You get to maybe show your cards a little bit, in this case, as to like who you think's a threatening team versus not, by separating the 15 pounds from the 20 pounds from the 25 pounds in the roadblock. What did you think about the concept of the driver's seat as it played out in this episode?
Well, in order to fully express my feelings, I think I do have to turn to Survivor. Specifically, I have to turn to 2 different Survivor seasons. First, I have to turn to Survivor San Juan del Sur, because every time I see driver's seat, I think you got to get in the back seat and let me drive.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to jump ahead to Heroes versus Healers versus Hustlers, because I got to tell you, Mike, the driver's seat, That is not an advantage.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this last week, right? I was like, listen, if I was on that race, I don't know if I'd want to step onto that mat first. And look, we'll talk about whether or not it was proper timing on their part to immediately follow this up with an opportunity to vote for a team to receive a U-turn. But, I mean, it's putting the power in one team's entire hands and obviously getting to earn a lot of drama in the process towards one duo in particular.
I think if this were me, and I bet I'd get yelled at and told I'm not allowed to do this, from now on, I rock up to the driver's seat, I'm going to stand 15 feet back from the mat until another team comes. I'm going to let that team pass me. And I don't want this, like, this is not, like, take this crown, like, from, I do not want to bear this cross.
Heavy
is the head that wears the driver's seat.
Heavy lies the head that wears the Indiana Jones hat.
Yes. You don't want this. There's no upside to this whatsoever. And they were put in an impossible position where somebody's going to get pissed off regardless. And yeah, they made a huge blunder that we're going to get into, but there was no winning this. Like, pretty much whoever got there first is going to end up eating a U-turn at some point, because this is just, like, effectively what the driver's seat is an opportunity. It is a mandatory choice to U-turn half the teams, is what it is. Because you're not allowed to say individually, this team gets 15, this team gets 15, this team gets 20 because I don't like them, this team gets 25 because they're strong. No, you had 2 15-pound stickers, 3 20-pound stickers, and 5 25-pound stickers. And you had to give those stickers out. And that means that 5 teams are getting 25 pounds regardless. Now, of course, we throw the express pass in and that gets a little more complicated, but there's another problem here. Like, I think this on its face is interesting. It's fine. It made for some interesting dynamics. It threw some drama into the things, but I don't like having this on the end of a task where there's no opportunity for anybody to switch up the order, and where everybody landed in the middle of the night and picked up a random number draw. Basically, it's like whoever's cab driver was the fastest out of the airport gets to choose this, because they're going to be the team that gets to go on the ATVs first.
Or Bernie and Kerrigan, you're basically screwed no matter what, because their flight came in 3 hours after everybody else.
Well, I'm sure Bernie and Kerrigan got into this with you, because Bernie and Kerrigan are one of those amazing race teams where you know immediately why they were cast, because you ask them one question and they take up your entire 15-minute time slot.
Lovingly so.
Yes, lovingly so. They were a genuine delight to talk to, and I'm really happy that I got the chance to. But one of the things that they pointed out was they didn't know there was going to be hours of operation bunching at the beginning of the leg. They pretty much... They didn't think they were all that screwed at this point, because they thought they were going to be stepping off the airport and Phil was going to be waiting at the gate. So, already it was kind of a bonus for them. And
yeah, playing with house money a bit.
Yeah, they're a little bit living on borrowed time there. But I think everybody else, it's like, who picked up the little tag first? That's not a skill, and this is not an advantage. So maybe it's kind of like you're getting a whammy. You got to spin first and you got the whammy. You're not rewarding a team for doing well by giving them something that's going to put a target on their backs. But it's more of a random chance sort of situation. And in that respect, I guess it's okay. But I think we got the best possible outcome, because this is the team that everybody was probably going to be targeting anyway.
Right.
And we just got to inflate that target hugely, especially when they screwed the pooch on it.
Yeah, that's what I'm intrigued by, is like, let's say Han and Holden end up getting to the driver's seat first and they end up using it. Like, do they suddenly jump up in the pecking order on everyone of like, oh, got to U-turn them? How much acrimony will be there, as opposed to your point, sort of the 1-2 punch of, hey, here's a team that is won half the legs and also pissed off half of everybody who's left with their decision making. I mean, again, their decision-making was very scattershot with everything, but specifically on the driver's seat. What did you make of at least their initial mentality, though, which was like, we want to assign the weight to the teams that we know. And that's another, I think, I totally agree with you that I didn't like the timing of this. Another example being like, well, we're just going to put the heaviest weight on the teams that are directly behind us to pad out our lead. And we know who's directly behind us because everyone left in a specific order.
Yeah, that is another design flaw, I think, because I think part of your calculus when you have to choose a U-turn or a yield is you are trying to figure out who's behind you and what is the biggest obstacle you can throw in front of that person. Because I think you even have Scott and Lori talking about this during the leg. And I was excited to hear it because this is something that I've talked about for the 13 years that I've been doing this podcast, is that you should never throw a disadvantage onto somebody that you have to look in the eye again. Like, you should hope that whatever you're doing to them, it knocks them out. So to that end, it's a big advantage to know in what order people are. And honestly, maybe the optimal strategy here with the driver's seat is to just pretend it's one of those things where if you get there fastest, you get the best thing. Like, just like stick it in the order of the people that you know are behind you, whatever order they're in. Like the next 2 get the 15 and the next 3 get the 20. I think that is probably the more fair thing, provided you can remember that, provided you can hold it in your head, because I certainly wouldn't be able to in the moment.
Right. It's like, I have so many other things to memorize for the upcoming memory challenge that's sure to happen in the finale. Like, I don't need to remember how everyone left on their ATVs, though I will say we skipped past this a little bit, just from a pure, obviously wasn't very competitive because everyone was kind of on rails, but from a pure aesthetic, like, this is why we come to the Amazing Race feeling of getting to see things you've never seen before in your life. What a freaking badass moment of, especially going through that cave and like watching everyone in real time just freak out about what they get to experience. It was one of those rare moments of reflection where they can not literally slow down. They were speeding through the jungle, but like be able to take a second from the race and appreciate the fact that they're in the freaking jungles of Bali.
Yeah, well, Melinda and Erica said it the best. It's like, this was a good day because we got to do something fun. And it really was. There was no objective to it. It was just pure fun. It's like, we're going to stop down and appreciate where we are for a minute. And in that respect, I thought that was really fun. And, you know, anybody that's going to Bali is now like that business with the ATVs, they're going to do gangbusters now. Like, it was a commercial for that because now I want to do it.
Yeah, it might as well have been one of those Expedia sponsored legs because it feels like sign me up to do that ASAP.
Yeah, strap the roaming gnome to the back of my ATV.
Well, Jess, the other big thing we need to talk about with Jonathan and Anna is, listen, you are much more of a historian than I am, but I would say, from my memory, the second worst use of an express pass ever. I guess the first being the flagrant not use of an express pass in Jonathan and Anna decide in the moment at the driver's seat, well, we're first and we can allocate the weight. So, of course, we're going to give ourselves the smallest. And we'll certainly get into what we thought about the roadblock in general. Anna has 15 pounds of rice she needs to make. She looks at the task, immediately says, nope, we're using our express pass. I mean, I'm sure there is more that went into this decision, though I don't know, because Anna admits in the car afterwards, like, yeah, it was just kind of spur of the moment. Had I thought things through, I wouldn't have done both the 15-pound allocation and the express pass. But this, the team said it best, Jess. This just felt like a bad decision overall.
It was bad for a few reasons. But yeah, I mean, just as this will never be the worst Jonathan that's ever been on The Amazing Race, this can't be the worst use of an express pass. Weirdly, another John. So there's that back in season
Weirdly
22.
Also in Bali, right?
Yeah, weirdly also in Bali. So I think we need to set this up, Mike, because weirdly also leg 4. So
this is really strange.
Yeah, time is a flat circle, Mike. Time is a flat circle.
And when did The Amazing Race 22 air? Because this is the season that we're talking about.
Yeah, The Amazing Race 22 aired about 10 years ago, I think. 10 or 11 years.
Oh, in 2013. Okay,
yeah,
so 2013. Not exactly a little. Oh, we missed the anniversary because that would have been even more eerie.
Yeah, like if it was like on the, now we're getting the flashlight out, we're putting it under our chin, like, 12 years ago on this very night in Bali on leg 4 of The Amazing Race. That was actually kind of the genesis of this particular RHAP niche as a coverage, as regular podcast coverage, because we weren't doing regular podcasts. I was like writing about it on the site, and I would come on to Rob's weird Wednesday morning live show sometimes to talk about The Amazing Race. And I had to do it from my office, and it was always awkward because I didn't have a good place to do it. But then that night, Rob calls me. He's like, I think we need to be podcasting about this because this is the wildest thing I've ever seen. And anyway, that was my personal anecdote with it. But I think we need to tell the people what happened because, Mike, I think only you and I have been sitting around talking about The Amazing Race like this for that long. So back in 2013, they were in Bali. It was leg 4. And there was this couple, this young, attractive surfer dude couple named John and Jessica, and they had an express pass. And they had a final task where there were all these surfboards on the beach, and they had to find a surfboard that had a specific picture on it before they could check in at the mat. And John and Jessica don't get there in last place. There are other teams still out there looking for surfboards, and they're wandering around, and they see the teams get the surfboard and leave, and Phil is 10 feet away. Phil is there. He's watching this go down. And at any moment, they could choose to whip out the express pass and say, we're done, we out, and check in at the mat and still be in the race. And they do not do it. And everybody else checks in, and finally they find the surfboard and they check in. And Phil's comment on this is, oy vey.
Because I believe even in the moment, like, John did not seem to, maybe this is a little bit of cope, but like, he didn't seem to show that much remorse for making probably the stupidest decision in Amazing Race history, where he had the opportunity. And the wild thing is just that, like, I feel like later that year on the Amazing Race Canada, like, the exact same thing happened, where like, it's a get out of jail free card. And he said, nope, not going to use it. And so that's the worst thing you could do with an express pass. And we talked about this last week. The second worst thing you can do, in our opinion, is to say, hey, we really want a chance at first place, so we got to use it and just get out ahead. And maybe sort of like corollary to that as well is, hey, we're already in first place and we need to extend our lead. Like, this was quite literally fight or flight. And I guess she opted for flight in that moment, in that whether it was just maybe the appeal of like, we're so far out in the lead, we just, put the teams right behind us further back. Let's keep the momentum going. But like, we talked about this with the detour switching last week. Like, you got to give the task a chance. I just think it was a bad move to look at the rice, even just watch a demonstration. Oh, I can't do 15 pounds. I'm going to use the express pass. They talked about how they wanted the express pass last week, Jess, because like, we know there's hot climates coming up, and so we're going to use it for a rainy day where there might not be rain in the sky, and, things might melt down. Again, maybe not to forecast too much from the next time on, but it looks like they might be having a bit of trouble. It would have been nice to be in your back pocket to use in a moment like that, something that you didn't want to waste on trying to just put yourself out further ahead for an extra trip and a first place finish.
Yeah, Mike, I'm going to say that, we always have a team every season that's kind of like the bickering team, or the team that's like got a rocky relationship that's going to bring the drama. But I think now, like, we are 2 seasons back to back of this happening. I think we have to replace this team archetype. I think this is no longer just the bickering team. This is the team that time traveled from like 2004 Amazing Race to compete in 2025 Amazing Race, because this is very like season 3 or season 4 coded, where there's a team in there that's like, oh, we just got to win every leg. We're just going to rack up those Expedia points, and we're going to get out in front, because if you're not first, you're last. And it's a terrible mentality on the Amazing Race, because you will burn out. And we've seen it happen time and again. And we've seen plenty of teams never get first on a leg and end up winning the whole thing. But here's Jonathan and Anna. Like, maybe they didn't get far enough in watching all of the episodes of Amazing Race. Like, maybe they started with season 1, and by the time they got called to be on the show, they were only up to like season 8 or 9. So maybe they thought that's just how it works. But I think it's very old school. And I think this was the intent of the driver's seat to begin with, because they want that old school drama. They want us to remember what it was that we watched back when I was a young, broke 20-something, and I couldn't afford to go out, so I just watched all the reality TV. Back when you were a teenager, um, we were very into this stuff, and they're trying to make us remember why, just so we don't lose interest. And it worked. It's great because now everybody is mad at Jonathan and Anna.
Yeah, so that's what I will say as well. Is as much as we might be admonishing them for the decisions that they made, like, it's making for great TV,
Yeah.
like, because now they've had moments of tension with each other, and now they have moments of tension with basically every other team, right? Because you have from the usual, excellers, and we have the storyline with Scott and Lori that we'll get into that, like, they were able to defy the odds, defy being given the most amount of weight and being like, yep, I'm still going to catch up with you at the detour. Obviously, they have Bernie and Kerrigan, who were just gobsmacked to find out that they had 25 pounds and arguably ended up like really sealing their fate in that moment. So it creates a lot of inherent drama. And it also speaks to something that Phil talked with me about preseason that we saw even in the first leg, right? Which is like just the sense of if you're not first, you're last. And maybe they have recovered a bit from like Jonathan not being in the best mood when they finished in second out of their group of teams in the premier leg. But like, there's that sense that still lingers, right? They would not have used the express pass to make sure that they could try to get another first place victory if they did not inherently believe like we still need to gun for first place at all times. Otherwise, you would have teams, to your earlier point, deciding I could linger back a little bit. Hey, driver, you want to slow down? Can we go grab some food? Actually, maybe we should take our bathroom break right now. So we don't have to worry about it later on. And then, oh no, we're not in the driver's seat. Too bad. So sad.
Yeah. I mean, did everybody make sure they had to go potty before they left the house?
Evidently not. Maybe we'll get
into that. Yes. I think there is an optimal strategy here. And if you are going to use the express pass, fine. Like if you don't think you're going to need it later, fine. You could end up going the whole thing and never using it. But I think the optimal strategy here, if you are going to use it, give yourself the 25 pounds, burn your express pass, give the 15 pounds to a team that's way far in the back so that everybody else has to scramble.
Yep.
And then, or the other thing you do is you just sandbag everybody in the back so that you are guaranteed to have screwed somebody who's not going to be there to be mad at you.
Exactly. Like basically where the line of thinking falls apart with Jonathan and Anna. I mean, I think first and foremost is the decision to use the express pass when you're already far out in the lead. But I would say second most would be sort of the pairing, right? Of it's like indecision through your decisions of saying, okay, we want to sandbag these other teams and give ourselves the least amount of weight to make this easiest for us. Oh, but we also are going to shirk it and use the express pass anyway. It reminds me a bit, it's a little apples and oranges, but like going back to Survivor, when Nayanka in Survivor Nicaragua said she was going to quit the game, but still insisted on going on the reward to see Gulliver's Travels, right? I'm like, I really want to leave the game, but you know what? I could use a hot dog on my way out.
I could go watch this terrible Jack Black movie.
But it's this ability to essentially be like, again, they harmed about half the teams in giving them 25 pounds, but they kind of harmed all the teams in making a display, albeit unintentionally, of like, we are going to remove one of the easiest options. That's what it looked like to them.
We're screwing one more person than necessary.
Yeah, so we shall see how that manifests. We could definitely come up with some predictions later on about how this double U-turn is going to come into play. Let's focus on the tasks themselves, Jess. Let's stay in the rice fields here. What did you think about this? Depending on the allotment that Jonathan and Anna gave out, you had to have either 15, 20, or 25 pounds of rice. This was billed as a very physical task, but I mean, maybe it just goes to show how, why everyone's tired of Lori and Scott playing down their lack of physicality because they were able to kill it here.
Yeah, I don't know, Mike. I think if you are dropped off, if your cab drops you off at a rice farm, the word rice is in your roadblock. I think everybody here should have expected some form of farm labor.
True, though. I believe it was Melinda and Erica. They picked Melinda because it was like, oh, it might be cooking rice.
Yeah, why would it be cooking rice? You're not at a restaurant.
I don't know. Don't you remember, like, Yeah, but I remember, wasn't it like maybe it was season 33, because that was like one of Ryan and Dusty's meltdowns, was like when they had to randomly cook the stuff like out in the open wild. Maybe they thought it would be one of those other tasks.
Yeah, maybe, but I think, if you hear hoofbeats, don't expect zebras.
True, true. So what did you think about this overall, though, in terms of the actual process of getting the rice? Did it seem
Okay.
like it was a hard task to do depending on what weight you got?
It just seemed labor intensive, and I don't think the weight made it any harder. It just meant you were there for longer. So it's fine. It was almost like you had to. It was like you turned over the hourglass, and you're just going to do rice for as long as the hourglass goes. Because I don't think anybody was necessarily any faster at it than anybody else. It was just like how long you had to be there and how much you had to do.
Yeah, I mean, what's also fun about these type of tasks as well is I always love when the judges give them nothing. And it's always a sliding scale, right? Where sometimes the judges are like, we saw this a bit with like the dancing and singing in the first episode of like, no, you have to work on this specifically. Sometimes it's just, hey, here's the grocery store scale, but even the arrow does not show how much more weight you need, and we're not going to answer for you how much more weight you need. So get a shovel in.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think you can kind of tell because it's going to be like it could be here or it could be here. You know what I'm saying? It could be very close or it could be very far off. So you can kind of eyeball it. But
All right.
it was very fun. I think the task judge was very fun. Like everybody
So
really seemed to
warm and
love her.
friendly. She
Yeah.
loves hugs.
Yeah, like everybody was hugging the task judge, and when the task judge seems to be welcoming and responding to that, I love it. When the task judge is a little bit awkward about it, I don't love it.
All right, well, let's make our way from the fields into Pengli Paran village, which was, just from a pure visual perspective, awesome. I mean, we'll get into obviously the more cultural aspects that come with the detour, but when Phil was like standing, on the central street with all these penjors surrounding him, like it was just such a cool image. I feel like this was a very immersive, like it didn't necessarily feel like sometimes what we do in these more urban centered ones of like, yeah, dote around all these cultural center landmarks and do these random things. And we see that in the course of this detour, Penjor or Pajagan, which are essentially assembling these different cultural totems. And it's interesting, Jess, because we talked about this with the fork in the road that, granted, I would say dancing and singing are kind of two different tasks, but still generally have a test of the same idea, which is rhythm. And here we sort of get two different tasks that test a similar thing of attention to detail and being able to not necessarily be like artistic, but copy a display and recreate it in front of you.
Yeah, but one of these things was considerably more complicated than the other, and I like what they've done here to make it harder. Because we've seen the Pajagans before. They used the other term for them when we saw them before in season 22. But I Googled this, and Google
Okay.
is never wrong. But a Gabogan and a Pajagan are the same thing.
And I'm reminding it now because it was like that they had to make. Did they have to walk around with it on their heads? Like I thought it was that they had to decorate the shrine, and the monkeys kept taking the fruit. If I'm remembering correctly,
I think so. I should have watched it again, but season 22 not a top half season for me. What I do remember, I think this was around the time one of the teams ended up going into somebody's random house and like praying at their shrine instead of going to the actual cultural area they
a
needed
few
to go
degrees
to.
removed from accidentally painting somebody else's house.
Yeah, it was very much in that same ballpark. So I remembered these structures and I remembered like the different kinds of fruit and having to build them to match the details of the other one. But I liked here that you had to not just build it to the specifications. And, I did miss the fruit stealing monkeys, but you had to go to the market and find the fruit and buy it, which is also very classic Amazing Race
Yes.
coded. And so it was not just that this was a much easier thing to build. You're building Duplos and you're building Legos over here, but you have to go buy the Duplos,
Yeah, I really enjoyed that as well. And maybe it was because that Hunter Holden and Nick and Mike chose to work together, or we didn't see that many teams doing it, that there surprisingly wasn't a lot of drama contained in buying the stuff, because Phil also made a big to do right about just from memory, you had to buy the things. I'm sure they wanted to design it more in a way to have teams be like, oh crap, we only got 4 apples and we needed 5. But that seemed to be the less dramatic portion of the task. It was a lot harder, just for one case in particular, to actually get the Pajagans from one place to another. We'll talk about this with Nick and Mike. Should they have had to go back to the start when their entire headpiece falls apart? Or did having to make them assemble it right there on the table serve as enough of a penalty?
I think that was enough of a penalty because they did already get the actual construction element approved. And I think the carrying it was mostly for optics. Like, I don't think that it was one of those things I don't think they intended. They might not have even planned for what would happen if somebody screwed that up. I think they just wanted to show people doing it. So they had already passed the task. They just needed to like drop off the thing. So I didn't mind that, but I did think it was entertaining. Like, much the same way I find it entertaining when people on Great British Bake Off trip and drop their cakes.
Yeah, and I felt so bad for that task judge because first off, she gets pelted by fruit. It was a drive-by fruiting where like all this just falls on her. And then she, which felt like a very relatable moment, is like, "Oh, I'm sorry." It's like, you shouldn't apologize.
Yeah, this is not on you. Are you Canadian?
Unless she's like super, she was super saboteur. It was like, I don't like the look. Listen, I know the story of Nick and Mike. They always have something go wrong in the second half of these episodes. So I need to let nature take its course and like screw up this headpiece a little bit and have it fall apart.
Are you saying she tripped one of them?
Yeah, she did. She tripped. I think it was Nick was the one that was offering up the headdress. Who knows? You know, we again very much running the gamut with these task judges. Let's go to the bigger to do because the majority of the teams worked on this one. The Penjors, these giant sort of like almost like racing flags, right, that you see alongside the side of like a marathon, but made out of obviously some decorative elements. I mean, this is a tried and true Amazing Race task, right? Like, look at the commemorative decoration and try to replicate it on your end. And unlike what we got in season 32, that one memorable time, there didn't seem to be like any catch that a lot of teams fell for.
Yeah, I don't like it when there's a gotcha on these things. But I do like that it was different things everybody got wrong and different things people had to finesse. So I think in that regard, it was a great task. I don't have any complaints about it. It was visually arresting. It was labor intensive. It was intricate, and it wasn't laborious to figure out what the connection was to the area because these things were already everywhere. And it made a lot of people mad at each other too. So that's always a bonus.
Yeah, and that's the thing as well. And I really enjoy, again, maybe it's just the pomp and circumstance of like them having to bring it to its final resting spot, but to have Jonathan, you know, be able to lampshade it a bit by talking about how it seems so similar to like he was doing Neil Armstrong. I would say more so like the Iwo Jima memorial of like putting up the flagpole.
Yeah, and I kind of like it. You know, we expect that Jonathan and Anna are probably going to argue while they're doing this. I love it when there's a team that you don't think is going to argue that gets into it with each other. And so I quite enjoyed Scott and Lori kind of getting a little snippy with each other and everybody else being like, why are mom and dad fighting?
Yeah, I love that. I love the asides of like Alyssa being like, oh, trouble in paradise. Like, is it shady? Yes, but we've talked about this. We love these moments of not only inter-team conflict, but intra-team conflict when it's, you know, on the more wholesome side like this.
Yeah, like we know there's nothing wrong. Like, they're going to be talking to each other again as soon as they finish the task. But I think that this is one of the reasons we like The Amazing Race, because it tests people. It pushes them to the breaking point. You watch them, you know, lose their stuff over it. And it's fun to see people go through the pressure cooker and come out at the other side and feel okay.
All right, Jess, let's get into this group of teams that, again, made some rather interesting decisions over the course of their time in Bali. And we've talked a lot about what Jonathan and Anna did. They were the main characters of this episode. Dare I say, Jess, maybe even like the main characters of the season so far, arguably, considering how much they have dominated. They have now won the most legs at 2. Granted, it's out of 4. But yeah, we've gotten into a lot about what they did this time and how it might bear fruit, much like the headpieces moving forward for the two of them.
Yeah, I think regardless of how this season shakes out, Mike, 5 years from now, when we're talking about season 37, we will remember this as the Jonathan and Anna season.
Mm.
Much the same way, like, I think 10 seasons ago, we had the Green Team season. They didn't win, but we always think of it as their season. I think this is very much, or season 23 kind of being Tim and Marie's season. This is Jonathan and Anna's season because they're highly visible and they're bringing a lot of the drama. They're kind of the magnet for everything that's happening on the show. And I think it's setting us up for a long run. But I think we are going to need to talk a little bit about, like, we talked about the top half of the episode, like, vis-a-vis what they should have done and what they did do and how this is painting a target on them. We haven't talked enough about Jonathan needing to pee.
Yeah, here's the thing is like Jonathan has been presented through 3 episodes as very intense, very competitive, a little contentious at times, but we see him in, I wouldn't say a brand new light, but certainly more sides to him than we may have thought. Of course, mentioning his love of all things Indiana Jones and admitting and Anna affirming that he is a giant dork. And yeah, this moment we're like, you listen, you use the driver's seat and you use the express pass and you can't give a guy a minute to go pee and stop. And it didn't even seem like she needed to stop. That's the weird thing too. Like, isn't there like an unwritten rule on the Amazing Race that partners need to remain within like a certain, radius of each other? This is the exception, I suppose.
Well, it was 20 feet. And what I've heard is that when you need to go to the bathroom, like, you kind of have to stop down. If it's going to separate you for more than that, you need to stop down and do it. And you can't keep working on the task while your partner is on the can. And a lot of times what people do is they also can't really control when the cameramen go on bathroom breaks. So what they do is they pretty much kind of hold it until the cameraman has to go, and then they go when he does. So I think I feel like the express pass should have bought him a break. And also, how long is that going to take? Seriously, it's number 1. He's not going to go like poop out 5 muffins and a vine of grapes, you know?
Exactly. He was not necessarily following the mnemonic that Holden had created, but it was very fun, right? To again have this like very intense personality, be like, I gotta go, come on, come on. And listen, I sympathize as well. Like, as someone who gets fixated on a lot of things. I mean, Jess, you can speak to this as well as someone with ADHD. Like, when you have to go to the bathroom, yes, you could sometimes dissociate your mind to like focus on the task at hand, but sometimes nature calls in so many ways, and that just overwrites everything you're trying to do, especially when you really have to pay attention to something like we did with the Penjors here.
Yeah, it's almost like saying, don't think of a pink elephant. Like, don't think about peeing. And here's what I love about doing this podcast with you, Mike, is because if we've still had Rob in the mix, he'd just be sitting here like staring at us blank faced. But I could text you the minute I watched this scene, and I could say, do you remember Amazing Race Australia season 3? And you are a deep enough nerd that you're immediately like, oh yeah, Tyson. Because there was a team. This was the Australia versus New Zealand season, and we had this team, Tyson and Sally. And I think similarly coded, like, they were a little bit less intense, but they were that team of like very, very physically fit.
Yeah, they were, or at least Tyson was a bodybuilder. I don't know if they both were, but they were very beefy.
Yeah. And the best runner, I think, like, I don't know if anything on The Amazing Race has made me laugh as hard as when Dan Heaton pointed this out to me, that every time we saw Tyson, he was either needing a bathroom break, and you would see him like run off camera and go pee like out in the middle of the forest, or he was chugging water. So it was just like he was just this constant stream of like hydration.
He was the water cycle containing one person.
He was the water cycle personified. And once this is pointed out to you, you cannot watch this season the same way again. And you kind of start looking for it. And if this ends up being a recurring thing, I'm not going to be mad at it. I don't think it will be, but that was the only thing I could think of, was Tyson having to stop every episode and go pee somewhere.
Yeah. So again, listen, I know that people have their opinions about this team, but like they have not failed to entertain me yet because again, they bring the conflict both within their team and outside of their team. And now you get these random goofy moments like Jonathan wanting to probably stop down on his chances of securing a first place because even he needs to go to the bathroom. So listen, it looks a little dicey for them. Next week, we will see how much they'll rue the decisions that they made in this episode. But it was a lot to break down just from all the interesting choices they made in this episode.
Yeah, when this type of team is just very focused and very intense and they're just good at everything, that's way less fun to watch than when they're also a hot mess, but they're doing well and they're also having interesting choices that aren't the best choices. Like I don't want a perfect team. I want a team that screws up a lot and is still pretty good. So I have no notes on that front. But I wonder if Anna was thinking about the season where a team got eliminated, when Keisha and Jen got eliminated because of a pee break.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, listen, from what I've heard, through the grapevine, like she is apparently the super duper fan between the two of them. So
Mhm.
she might have had Keisha and Jen on the mind when he asked to go to the bathroom.
Yeah. I mean, Mike, someday in the off season, like when we have another one of those lockdown years where we're just scrambling for content and you're doing like weird countdowns of weird moments and you've run out of Survivor ones, let's do a whole Amazing Race podcast on like the best pee moments.
All right, listen, we'll see who comes in at number one. That will be a very choice moment in more
Who's gonna
ways.
get the golden trophy?
Exactly. All right, let's get into the rest of our teams here, those that were the victims of the driver's seat. And I want to say, Jess, perhaps the biggest beneficiaries of the driver's seat might be Carson and Jack. Now hear me out here. It's because first off, they start, their time in Bali in the lowest placing they've been in this entire season. Just because of a bad taxi driver, they wind up in the second half of the teams. I think it was 6 out of 10. And they are able to make up a lot of time, but due to Jonathan and Anna's, system of initially allocating the weights, they don't wind up with the most. And because Scott and Lori were able to prevail in such a public setting with their weight, it drew a lot of attention onto them, as well as Jonathan and Anna, who I would peg as the teams most likely to be recipients of this double U-turn vote. And so despite the fact that Carson and Jack are one of the best teams of the season by a country mile, certainly up there with, like, I would say a gaggle of 4 teams at this point, they're kind of able to scrape by unscathed just because they hadn't had any examples in this leg of like showing off their prominence on display to other teams.
Yeah, they came out of there with the cleanest hands of anybody on the show, and it's pretty impressive. So I'm happy for these guys. I want to see them continue to do well. They are genuine delights. I think maybe my favorite moment of the entire episode, in an episode that had a lot of really good moments, was when they're opening the clue and Carson goes to rip it and he just yeets the clue. That was the best thing.
Yeah, I love that. I love their nerd moment when, they're just talking about how they would be riding this like a dragon, and the fact that they were able to, briefly cast haste on themselves and increase their move speed when they got to the rice fields. It just goes to show that even when the luck of the Amazing Race gives them a pretty bad draw, they were able to make up a lot of ground, which goes to show like you are a truly skilled team in the Amazing Race when you're able to do that. So
yeah, well, they rolled the nat 20, right?
Exactly. So these guys were able to slip by, again, pretty unscathed, especially considering the teams that they are sandwiched between earned a lot of attention. So we'll talk about this at the end. Who knows? Maybe there are a couple teams that are eyeballing them as like, if I'm tracking the placements, Carson and Jack have done a pretty damn good job so far. But it seems like they're able to somehow maintain their place under the radar.
Yeah, I love this for them. I want them to keep doing well. I love these guys.
All right, let's talk about Scott and Lori here, Jess, because what an interesting episode for the two of them. First, to your earlier point, we got a little bit of the salt, putting the salt in Salt Lake, if you will, with both their reactions to Jonathan and Anna, as well as maybe a little bit of bristling with each other, perhaps spurred on by sort of the resentment from that. But Jess, perhaps a moment that will come to fruition next week, which is Scott and Lori can't play the H card, perhaps as well as they think they are doing. 4 legs in, people are getting firsthand accounts to just how much they are kicking ass at the race so far. And so they're not buying like, Lori, I'm reading your date of birth out loud from your driver's license. Look how much you were able to. But don't worry, you could still race us in a foot race, people. Just don't bank on that because chances are we'll be way ahead of you to not necessitate a foot race in the first place.
Oh, my sciatica's acting up. Oh no. No, what year is this? I need some prune juice. Okay, they are so good. They're so good at the race, and they should have known this was going to happen. And yet, they go full Dave O'Leary over being given 25 pounds of rice. Like, how dare you? We are old. It's like, yes, sir, you are also good.
Yeah, you just came in first place in the last leg.
Yeah, I don't know what you were expecting, but you can't hide your light under a bushel. Not anymore. And you just got to own it at this point.
Yeah. And then, I did like the fun moment where Scott's like, I'm going to treat Jonathan and Anna like I do one of my kids when they did something wrong. Just ignore them. Like, they're very much trying to steer into we're the mom and dad of the race. Feel free to underestimate us. But it feels like for the first time in a long time, just like we are getting people actually clocking it in the moment. And maybe some of their frustrations as well come from that. That, to your point, a little bit of like, come on. Really? Yeah, you're trying to undervalue yourself, but you're getting called out on it. And I do wonder how much they're realizing this perception and if and when they are U-turn next week, how surprised they'll be by it.
I don't think they'll be surprised, but I think there will be a lot of indignation. I will give them credit. I would be willing to bet that with 8 children, Scott and Lori never get caught by surprise, but with a pee break.
Yes.
Like they always go before they leave the house.
And the good thing as well about if they use this tactic to ignore their children when there's wrongdoing, they have many other things they have to deal with, right? Like this is more so, I'll get you out of my hair for a hot second and don't acknowledge you. I have 7 other fires to put out at the moment.
Yeah, I can't even imagine that because I got one and one is taxing my patience enough.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see with Scott and Lori. I mean, we'll talk about this at the end again, but I can't help but believe that we got so much both in confessional and on the mat amongst every other team that we're going to talk about. Enough of a majority as to wow, Scott and Lori are really good that I have a very deep feeling that they are going to be one of the recipients of the W turn next week.
I just hope it doesn't okay, I'm gonna pull something out of the deep lore again. Hope it doesn't body break them.
Yeah, that's true as well. I also hope that, to your point about Dave, because that was one of the many unsavory things to be found in the Amazing Race 24. In my opinion, the worst.
We don't talk about that season
of the Amazing Race ever, but it just led to so much, to your point, indignation and hypocrisy and why are you complaining about this? You're doing so well. I have faith that with Scott and Lori, it will just more so light a fire under them than have them kind of whinge about the fact that why would they, gang up on the old people in the race. They can use it more so as motivation rather than demotivation.
I think they understand that it's not going to work long term. They can try it once. But next leg, when they get U-turned, I don't think they'll be terribly surprised by it. And they're not going to be how dare you put a hotel on Boardwalk? You should have let me buy that. I bet they've played a few games of Monopoly with a 7-year-old too.
All right, let's now get into, because it was these 3 teams, maybe showing about the field of racers we have right now. It's basically these 3 teams and then everyone else just kind of running confusingly around the streets of this village, trying to figure out where the pit stop is. And they all basically check in within minutes of each other. But the one pair that, despite maybe some hesitations, was able to stay steadfast in their directions and got rewarded with back-to-back 4th place finishes here, Melinda and Erica, who were able to come back from, Melinda was pretty much the second to last person to leave the race besides Bernie and Kerrigan. And they made up a butt ton of time just going the straight and narrow, literally.
Yeah, and for a second, I thought we were seeing a replay of the first leg where they ended up walking a huge amount of distance in what was the right direction, but ultimately knocked them pretty far to the back of the pack. But no, they knew what they were doing. They did the right thing. And they were zigging when others had zagged, and it pushed them up to the top of this giant Akira-like conglomeration of teams.
Yeah, I mean, what I find interesting is that one of the unfortunate things about the boot list so far is, right, we've gotten rid of 5 teams, and I think like only 3 men comprised those 5 teams. We got rid of all the all-female teams with the exception of the 2 of them. And look, given given their consistency, there is a chance they could possibly sneak their way into the final 4, maybe even the final 3, but it is tough to see only 4 legs in. This is the last all-woman team standing.
Yeah, but it gives you somebody to cheer for. Like, I love that, mother-daughter teams typically not very high performing. We had, I think the only mother-daughter team I can think of that did terribly well on The Amazing Race was Nancy and Emily in that's all the way back in season 1.
Yeah.
So that we've got a team that is strong and competent at the race and can like concentrate all of the rest of the girl power into one team. I'm here for it, and I want them to do well. I want them to go far.
All right, checking in right after Melinda and Erica, Han and Holden. They were manifesting making up some ground last week. It didn't go terribly well. This week, they were able to make the jump. I think, the equalizer certainly helped, but they were able to remain competitive with the other teams. They end up taking the road not taken in the form of the detour. And listen, unfortunately for Holden, it was no mama rat and baby rat when skiing, but still, mnemonics are the best on The Amazing Race.
I love a good mnemonic. What I didn't understand was why there were snakes involved. Like, is it just because of Indiana Jones? But they didn't have to buy any snakes. Why are there snakes?
I also was confused about muffins. Was it just that like there was some sort of pastry involved? Were these decorations that looked like muffin tops?
There were those pink things. I thought those might have actually literally been muffins. But whatever they were, they resembled muffins enough that we could just call them muffins.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would necessarily... I actually am intrigued if they had enough time, if they wanted to be like... and we see this sometimes on The Amazing Race of, oh, take this task where you make this thing, and it's like, all right, I'm making the decision in my head. Do I stay for a second and eat the thing, or can I go? Though this time I think it would be both sacrilegious and sacrilegious to like make this offering at this temple and then be like, oh, can I grab a muffin for the road? My carb intake's pretty down for today.
Yeah, don't steal muffins from God. Come on, man. Yeah, speaking of San Juan del Sur, we got some muffin action here.
Yeah, who's Muffin?
Yeah, who's Muffin? But I love this. They had some great moments this leg, and kind of a coming out party for Han and Holden, who have been kind of quiet up to this point, despite having like a pretty good comeback. And I'm hoping to see more of this because they are like stealthily one of the funnier teams this season.
Yeah, and they talk about how, obviously with their family's history, I think they said that their mom came from a rice, growing family initially. So like, it's those fun moments as well where racers are able to connect culturally too, and be able to showcase like, hey, it's cool for our parents who have gone through so much to be able to watch us undergo similar experiences to what they went through, albeit not with a camera in their face and, $1 million on the line.
Yeah, and I liked the little callback there. And yeah, I think for this kind of team, they're doing very well.
And on that note of finding things out about some of these teams, let's talk about Alyssa and Josiah. Josiah might become one of the most interesting racers as we find out more and more about this man.
This dude low-key fascinates me. Like, he has had an interesting life. You kind of, like, you look at this team and it's like, this is a type of team, like they're the kind of wholesome couple with the big smiles, and we don't expect them to have big blow up fight. We don't expect them to necessarily run roughshod over the other teams, but they're going to be solid, and they have been so far. But then like Josiah just comes out with these little tidbits, whether it's like getting crazily excited over something or dropping this on us that he lived in Honduras.
Yes, he lived in Guanaja, which was this small island village off the coast. So he grew up on an island his entire life and got to places as he needed to by boat.
It's fascinating. He might be the most interesting man in the world, Mike.
Which is so interesting because, yeah, to your point, again, not to stereotype them too much, but these are usually the people with this look that like might be some of the most boring racers. And
Mhm.
so I'm just excited for Alyssa and Josiah to continue in the race, not only because they're a very consistent and solid team, but because I just imagine this guy's going to come up with like a Snapple fun fact about himself in every episode.
Yeah, I hope he does, because it's genuinely one of the highlights of the episode.
All right, next up, Brett and Mark. Not much from Brett and Mark. I mean, I guess Brett's able to talk a little bit about what I was talking about with Carson and Jack, right? Of like, hey, we're killing the tasks. It's just that nobody's seen it because we've usually been in the back of the pack. That happens here, where they're one of the last teams to arrive to the roadblock. In fact, colliding with the aforementioned Alyssa and Josiah, because their driver, I mean, it's quite literally user error, right? It was that they put in an address in whatever map application the driver was using. The driver picked a different address for some reason, and they got taken 45 minutes out of their way.
Yeah, I mean, that's rotten luck, for sure. And it could be one of these situations. I think we've had teams like this before, where every time they get to the task, they're in and out fast because they're good at everything except getting where they need to be.
Yeah,
And
actually, it reminds me of maybe it's just I'm thinking about like dancers, cheerleaders, but a bit like Quentin and Maddie
yes.
from season 34, right? Remember when they drove to the wrong country
Okay,
and
that was overblown. They did not drive to the wrong country, Michael. They
they were
got
giving directions to the wrong country?
yeah, they were given directions to the wrong country, and to their credit, did not take those directions.
Yes, but they did come to, a task in last place and were able to just make up a huge amount of time to avoid elimination on the task. And so that's what we've seen from Brett and Mark so far, is that they've had a couple of brushes with the back of the pack, but almost every time they've just been able to power through.
Yeah, and I think it bodes well for them that they're able to do this kind of thing. Because they didn't get super upset about it. We've seen them get super upset about things that are out of their control, but this time they kind of took it in stride. It's almost like, LOL, it's another day of something terrible happening to us on The Amazing Race.
Yeah, it's able to give you that sense of clarity, right? And we talk about this sometimes with like, Tyson has talked about this with Survivor of like, when you're a winner and you return, you haven't experienced what it's like to be blindsided, and so you don't know the signs. If you haven't had sort of a brush with possible elimination, like that experience does help harden you a little bit. At least that's from what I've heard from talking with a bunch of racers. And so for like Brett and Mark, they're used to scramble mode at this point. And it's also, the perception about them is something that gets them assigned, an easy amount of weight when look at these guys. They absolutely killed 20 pounds of rice. They probably would have even killed 30 pounds of rice, but because they're being shown as so far back in the pack or not necessarily huge threats to win, it's working in their favor.
Mike, do you think that the driver's seat would be better if instead of having it be 2, 3, and 5, if it was like 2, 5, and 3? Like you have to screw 3 people and give 5 people the middle one.
Yeah, I mean, you have to find that sweet spot, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you talked about how 5 is just such an egregious number because you're pissing off more than half of the teams and to have a reason to vote for you in the next episode. So I feel like 3 or even 4 could be a nice one. Amazing Race likes to put like 3 teams on the last flight or 4 teams on the last flight if they can schedule it out. So I think that's a good way to apportion it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like in your brain, like when you have that odd number, it sort of helps you keep track of it better.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably why they did it. There's like some neuroscience thing behind it, but I wonder if having to give that extra weight to fewer teams, that might increase the drama because it feels more specifically targeted.
Right. It's like, oh, why did you choose us out of this? As opposed to like granted, there's not a lot of outs Jonathan and Anna could use, but they could be like, we had to give weight out. We had to give 25 pounds to 5 different teams. Like, I'm sorry. This is more so, oh no, there were only 3 teams you needed to pick here. Like, oh, you're going on the Survivor reward and you could pick 6 out of 8 people. Why did you not pick me and this other person?
Right. And I like whenever they have that Survivor reward and Jeff keeps letting them pick people. It's like, at this point, just tell them who's not going.
Exactly. Like, why don't you just tell me the people you're not picking on the reward?
Exactly.
All right. Last couple of teams here before we get to the eliminated duo. Nick and Mike, I was ready to come in here as we were getting towards, even as they dropped, the headpiece on the judge. I was like, they're gonna finish in like fourth place, and we're gonna get this storyline of like them being able to overcome these second half, fumblings to be able to rally to the top of the pack. Does not work here, just primarily to the fact that they follow the wrong directions, quite literally go in a circle, and are now part of this basically like giant marathon runner pack to get to the pit stop where they get outran here. So nature ran its course, much like it did with Jonathan, and Nick and Mike end up finishing in third to last.
Yeah, but they still had some of the best lines of the episode. I think "I got rice in my eyes" is pretty good. Like, I don't know how that was not the
Is
title
that an
of the
excuse
episode.
for like when someone catches you crying in our culture of toxic masculinity?
Yeah, it's like somebody's cutting onions. I got rice in my eyes. I liked the comparison to bodegas. Like, as a New Yorker, that's
Yes,
close
yes.
to my heart, because I could probably go to a bodega in my neighborhood and find, pink muffins and mangosteens, just because they got everything.
Yeah. And I also like, for what it's worth, Hunt and Holden, they got the Pedingan on the second try. Nick and Mike got it on the first. Like,
Mhm.
this was the rare second half task that they excelled in. So,
Yeah, they snatched defeat from the jaws of victory there, Mike.
yeah, I mean, what I will say is like I had a feeling, even if I was estimating like they might get a fourth place finish, that like they wouldn't do hugely well in this leg, because I feel like when we do, and maybe this is spoiling things a bit for people, we'll get a confessional in the beginning of the episode if they're like, yeah, we've been really struggling, we've gone like third to last place, second to last place, but this might be our leg. That usually forecasts a team doing really well or just crashing and burning. So the fact that we didn't get that made me feel like, okay, maybe they won't do as well as I thought they would, but it is market improvement. Like, this could be a team that is just much like we talked about with Han and Holden, learning as they go, being able to figure out their own style of workings to the point where, yes, they are third to last here, but it's not necessarily representative of their racing skills this episode.
Yeah, they're figuring it out, and they've got room to figure it out in this big cast. So, we could see them go quite a bit further. Like, do I think they've got it in them to win? I'm not sure about that, but if they have a couple of legs where they really turn it up, they could.
All right. Pops and Jeff, they are the last to finish out of this giant blob of teams. Pops and Jeff continue to do well. Obviously, the roadblock was well suited for them, which is understandably why Jonathan and Anna give them 25 pounds, though they are not salty about it. Really, they just kind of remark like, yeah, it sucks, but I would do the same thing if I were in their shoes. I did love the small exchange of Pops being like, I'm proud of you today. And Jeff's like, today? What about other times?
I love them. We're not getting very much Pops and Jeff, and that makes me feel like George might be breaking his streak here. But they continue to be lovely. They're good racers. They haven't made any major mistakes, and they're funny when we see them. But yeah, I would say, like, you can't read the edit on Amazing Race the same way you can really read the edit on Survivor. Like, there are some tells, but these guys, I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon, but do I think that we're going to be looking at them as possible winners by the end? I'm starting to have my doubts.
Yeah, I mean, this could be sort of like an Yvonne and Melissa thing from last season where it's like, I could see them making the top 5 and maybe going out a bit there. And it's just more so, oh, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be one of the next teams eliminated. It's just that we're not going to see a lot of them for some reason because they're generally in the middle of the pack. And so they'll be the sort of UTR G. Odysseys of the Amazing Race 37.
Yeah, and sometimes the UTR G. Odysseys are the best exit interviews. Like, I think Yvonne and Melissa are like probably a
Great.
top 10 all-time exit interviews. So I'm looking forward to getting to chat with these guys.
All right, well, let's talk about a team that you and I got the chance to talk to today. Our eliminated duo, Bernie and Kerrigan. It's weird to call it an up and down leg for them because they were consistently in last place for pretty much the entirety of it. But it must have been so much to your point for them to think, okay, we're automatically going to get eliminated because we're the only team on the flight 3 hours behind everybody else, to getting caught up with everybody, to then getting 25 pounds in the driver's seat, to then going to the detour, but then getting lost on the way to the detour and basically sinking their chances there. And An unfortunate representation as well of their dynamic. Lots of conflict between Bernie and Kerrigan, carrying through to the confessional as well, where you could tell that even in the moment. I mean, again, the writing was a bit on the wall for them, but you could even read there like Kerrigan kind of airing out some frustrations that she had pent up over the course of their time in Bali.
Yeah, they usually wouldn't do that for us because I think the second we saw that, it's like, oh, that's all over for them. Because if they came out of this okay, they wouldn't have that buildup of emotion in the confessional. They might have it on the mat, but we wouldn't see them after the fact being this upset because they'd be psyched. And they were decidedly unpsyched in their confessional. So it almost gave the entire game away. But it was also, I almost think it's more frustrating when you are almost in it. I think being almost in it is worse than being hours behind everybody and knowing you're not in it.
Yeah, I mean, it is sort of that would you rather, right?
Mhm.
Of like, would you rather be the first boot of a reality competition show or like make it all the way to the end and lose? Of like, it really is pick your poison. And unfortunately for Bernie and Kerrigan, again, the way they went out was sort of representative of their dynamic, which I was entertained by, right? Like I had a lot of intrigue in watching the two of them like yes, be combative with each other, but genuinely trying to talk through the disconnects that they were having. It felt therapeutic in a way. Like, obviously, emotions were high, especially as Kerrigan, again, talked in that post race confessional of like, I am trying to put myself out there more, but like, I am not going to fight you on every single thing. So why aren't you listening to me? For what it's worth, in talking with Bernie and Kerrigan, what it seemed to come down to is just that like Kerrigan was really overwhelmed from doing the roadblock. And so Bernie decided to be the navigator, and it just got them completely turned around. And as a result, got them kind of hopelessly lost and missing the signpost and everything like that. So it was maybe that what we like to call killer fatigue almost manifesting in and of itself. But I thought a really interesting team to watch. And look, they are still close nowadays, if not even closer. It's these raw moments where you get to see teams be incredibly open with each other of like, what is not working in our relationship right now?
Yeah, I think it's a testament to their bond that they're able to talk this through. And I I think it was a lot of things, like, I think 1 or 2 things go differently, we might have been talking to a different team, but it was just this, like, domino effect of, like, one thing after another, really keeping them just out of reach of being safe.
Yeah. So, any final thoughts about Bernie and Kerrigan? Any other things you want to tease about the exit interview, which is probably in people's ears at the moment we're putting this out?
Well, I think as we mentioned, Mike, they are delightful.
Yeah.
Um, it was one of those it was another thing, like, back to back 2 weeks in a row, I get in the Zoom room for my slot, and they are 8 minutes late. And I'm like, "Okay, I'm not even mad at that because I know that means that they have a lot to say."
Yeah. So they broke down a lot in both of our interviews about obviously where a lot of their disconnect was coming from, what they were working through. But again, they have emerged on the other side in, a solid, albeit maybe even healthier place, and just what they need to work on with themselves as well as with each other. And listen, I'm not going to be mad at a team that hashes out all of their problems with each other in the airport in episode 2 of the season.
Yeah, I mean, for as little time with them as we got, they definitely packed it full of interesting television.
All right, Jess. Next week, we got a little bit of the new in the driver's seat, but now a familiar face is showing itself, but maybe in a bit of a new way here as we're continuing in Indonesia, but for the double U-turn vote. So for the unaware, to start, what is a U-turn?
A U-turn is when you get to a detour, you usually get to choose one thing or the other thing, and the U-turn basically says you have to do both. And ideally, you don't find out you have to do both until you finish one half of the detour, and then you have to turn back, as in you have to make a U and go back and do the other task. But lately, Amazing Race just doesn't know their alphabet, so they just stick it at the beginning, and it's like more of like a T than a U because you got to go this way and then you got to go that way. But basically, there's 2 detours. Usually, there's one half of it you don't even have to worry about, but when there's a U-turn involved, there's one or two unlucky teams are going to have to do both.
And so this is a bit of a twist on the U-turn, which was a big part of the show from seasons, 12 until what? Probably like 30, around like 29 or 30 or so. It made a brief return in season 35 for one leg, but only in season 31, which was Amazing Race versus Survivor versus Big Brother, which is just a ridiculous theme. Why would they ever want to do something?
Why would they ever put contestants from other shows on Amazing Race, Mike?
I have no possible idea. But what they were able to bring in was a voting element, which obviously carries over from those other two shows where they did a double U-turn, which they've done a lot, which is two teams get U-turn rather than one. But the way it worked was that before the leg, each team had a vote. And the two teams that received the most votes basically came into the leg with a U-turn applied. And it sounds like we're going to get the same thing here. What do you think about that?
I think it's okay. I think it's interesting, especially because we basically just flagged who those teams are going to be. I don't. This is not a spoiler, I don't think, because they just set it up for us so perfectly. So if that outcome is anything other than Jonathan and Anna and Scott and Lori ending up in the U-turn, I'm going to be very surprised.
What I will say was an improvement was I looked this up to remember it. For some reason, when they did it in season 31, they did it as an open vote, and the order was randomly drawn. And so it really was just the folly of like, all right, my vote is predicated upon the team that went before me. This, I saw some whiteboards, and I imagine that each team's going to go off, write down their vote, and then show it, and they can't necessarily change it. So it'll be a little bit more trader style rather than the challenge.
Yeah, which is good. I don't like it where you can just basically pile on, because it's like you're not going to put forth another name if a name's already out there. Like, why take that smoke? Like, just be like, well, you said that Jonathan and Anna should get U-turn, so I'm just going to say that too. It's not me, it's not you. I'm fine. So I like this a little bit better, but I wonder how much collusion there'll be, because we've seen these votes happen before where there's been a little bit of collusion. And here, there have been some alliances that have formed, and they might be discussing it, or they might not have the chance. So it'll be interesting if the alliances end up splitting because of this.
Right. Like, how spur of the moment will this be? Was there a target already set in their minds where they're like, okay, if we get to the U-turn board first, we will U-turn X, so that when it's a vote, it will just transplant over. We'll see. It will kick off an episode that is sure to be exciting, sure to get heated again in more ways than one. Jess, any other things you want to talk about with this leg? Anything else you want to tease about your exit interview?
I think the only other thing is, I think the episode title, we had some really good quotes this episode that I think would have made great episode titles in another universe. I think that Rice did something horrible to you is probably my favorite thing that got said all episode.
Yeah, it just reminds me of a bad trip I took to P.F. Chang's one time.
Yeah, man, you gotta be careful about those fast casual establishments, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked, I also, one thing that I noticed is that you had a lot of the teams this season have been really judicious about using the local language at every opportunity. And I don't know if this is just that we've got a group of people that are very on the ball when it comes to wanting to know how to engage with the locals, or if this is something like maybe the show has decided to try to help people be a little bit more culturally sensitive. But the days when people are just screaming rapido at a taxi driver in Japan, like, those are over, because we've got people like very respectfully knowing how to say at least thank you. And we see Scott and Lori saying, we're in a hurry, please go fast. And I love that. If this is a group of people that's conscientious about learning that kind of thing, I love that. If it's the show itself saying, here's some things that you might want to say in the local language, I like that too.
All right. So feel free to check out Jess's interview with Bernie and Kerrigan. Check out mine as well at Parade. And hey, if you're roaming through Facebook, join our group. Rob has a website.com/Tara group. I put up discussion threads there every week to talk about the episode. We post our podcast there too, but they're open for any general discussion about Amazing Race, past, present, and future. And make sure you subscribe to everything we're doing at WeKnowAmazingRace.com. Speaking of future, Jess and I will be back next week as we see the fallout from the U-turn vote and everything that is to come of it as we continue our way through Indonesia. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.
This is RHAP. We know reality TV. This is RHAP. We know reality TV.